The Galactic Empire fielded over 100 specialized stormtrooper variants. Every single one was described as highly trained, elite, stationed on key Imperial worlds, protecting key Imperial officials. And they got slaughtered by teddy bears with sticks and a guy who learned the Force last week. Wookieepedia, the fan-maintained encyclopedia that functions as the franchise's unofficial military ledger, currently catalogs approximately 147 distinct trooper variants across all Star Wars media. 60 stormtrooper types, 69 clone trooper types, 18 dark trooper types, 147 designations for what amounts to a single infantry role. The United States Armed Forces, defending an actual planet against actual threats, maintains fewer distinct military occupational specialties per combat branch. And every one of these 147 Imperial variants shipped with the same copy-paste language on arrival. Highly trained, elite, specialized, hand-picked, feared across the galaxy. The words never change. The product always does. Just slightly enough to justify a new name, a new action figure, a new in-game unit. 90% of these supposedly elite variants are a standard trooper holding a different gun or wearing a different color. And we're going to prove it, variant by variant. The original sin was the pauldron. In the original Star Wars films, a handful of stormtroopers wore small shoulder pauldrons of different colors. Costuming details. Prop department variety for crowd shots. Most audiences never registered them, and nobody was supposed to. But the expanded universe seized on those scraps of fabric and built an entire rank taxonomy out of pure interpretation. Black meant enlisted trooper or corporal. White designated a sergeant. Blue marked a sniper. Yellow or orange flagged a unit commander. Red denoted an officer or chief. A prop department had tossed colored fabric on extras to break up the visual monotony of identical white helmets stretching down a Death Star corridor. Decades later, the franchise codified that accident into rigid doctrine, and the precedent became permanent. Any visual difference, no matter how trivial, could be classified as a distinct trooper variant. That door opened in the 1990s. It has never closed. Restraint defined the original trilogy's approach to Imperial forces. Snowtroopers existed because the story went to a snow planet and someone in wardrobe asked what cold weather armor would look like. Scout troopers existed because the story went to a forest and someone needed a recon soldier on a speeder bike. Each variant emerged from a specific narrative demand, was designed by an artist solving a visual problem, and entered the canon exactly once through a film seen by hundreds of millions of people. 3 trooper types across 3 movies. Maybe 4 if you count the Emperor's Royal Guard in their crimson robes. Lean, functional, menacing precisely because the palette was so tight. Then the merchandise machine understood the math. In 1978, Kenner sold 40 million Star Wars action figures, generating $100 million in revenue after licensing the rights for a flat fee of just $100,000. A 1,000-to-1 return on investment in a single calendar year. That staggering number established a financial truth the franchise has obeyed for half a century. Characters are units of commerce. Every new helmet design is a potential new product. Stormtroopers, with their modular armor, were the perfect canvas for this logic. Change the color, swap the weapon, rewrite the back card description. New toy. Same mold, same price, improved profit margin because design costs get amortized across more and more SKUs. Hasbro refined the formula further. Some variants get deliberately short-packed, fewer units per case shipped to retailers, creating artificial scarcity that inflates secondary market value and juices the collector compulsion. A short-packed variant of the same trooper in different paint may command significantly more on the secondary market from a completionist who needs every helmet in the display case. Each new trooper variant is all but guaranteed to appear as a Hasbro Black Series figure. Each Disney Plus show announcement triggers the same Pavlovian response from Hasbro's product team. New show means new troopers. New troopers mean new SKUs. New SKUs mean new earnings call talking points. The production pipeline from screen to shelf has been compressed to roughly 6 months. Total Star Wars merchandise revenue now exceeds $32 billion. Box office returns sit at $10.3 billion. 22% of the franchise's total revenue has ever come from the movies themselves. The other 78% flows from toys, games, apparel, and collectibles. When you understand that ratio, 147 trooper variants stops being a lore curiosity and becomes an economic inevitability. The franchise doesn't create trooper variants because the Empire's military needs them. It creates them because Hasbro's quarterly earnings need them. Each new variant arrived dressed in a paragraph or two of in-universe justification. The Coastal Defense Stormtrooper, also known as the Shore Trooper, was specifically trained for operations in tropical environments. The Flame Trooper was equipped with D-93 incinerator units for close-quarters suppression. The Riot Control Stormtrooper carried a Z6 baton and Betaplast shield for crowd management. Read any one of these descriptions alone, and it sounds reasonable. Militaries do specialize. Read 50 of them back to back, and the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. They read like the back of an action figure package, because, in many cases, that is exactly what they were first written for. The Star Wars Character Encyclopedia dutifully catalogs shore troopers alongside standard military hierarchy as though they were always part of the plan. But someone needed a trooper that looked cool on a beach, and someone else needed to sell a figure of it by Christmas. The justification followed the product, never the other way around. The tail wagged the bantha for 30 years running. Before we prosecute the guilty, intellectual honesty demands we acknowledge the innocent. Out of 147, roughly 5 to 7 variants are legitimately distinct. They earned their designations. They prove the standard is achievable, which makes the other 90%'s failure worse. Death Troopers are the gold standard. Introduced in Rogue One, they delivered everything a variant should. Matte black armor that absorbed light instead of reflecting it. Physical imposingness achieved through the deliberate casting of taller actors who towered over standard stormtrooper extras. Encrypted vocal communications rendered their speech unintelligible to anyone outside their unit, a specific operational security measure, not just a visual gimmick. A genuine bodyguard role tied to Director Krennic. Visually, functionally, narratively distinct. A person who has never seen Star Wars can look at a Death Trooper and a standard Stormtrooper side by side and immediately grasp that these serve entirely different purposes. That's the bar. Almost nothing else clears it. Dark Troopers, in their original incarnation, belong alongside them. When the 1995 video game Dark Forces introduced the concept, these weren't soldiers at all. They were autonomous battle droids, powered exoskeletons, or fully independent machines built in 3 escalating phases, the third constructed from nearly indestructible frick metal alloy. The Empire was pursuing full mechanization of its infantry, an idea with genuine military historical resonance, closer to a drone program than a uniform change. By the time Dark Troopers reappeared in The Mandalorian Season 2, they were droids again, terrifying enough to require a Jedi with a lightsaber to defeat them. That version earned its place through performance and design. Purge Troopers from Jedi Fallen Order deserve a nod, the last generation of Jango Fett clones, repurposed as expendable death squads hunting surviving Jedi alongside the Inquisitors, wearing modified black Phase 2 clone armor with distinctive green-tinted visors, filling a role no other unit was designed for. That's the list. 5, 6, 7 variants out of 147 that a reasonable military analyst would sign off on. The remaining 90+ belong in what we're calling the guy with different gun tier. And the single funniest pattern hiding inside that tier is what can only be described as the doomtrooper phenomenon. Across 3 decades, multiple writers working independently in separate corners of the franchise all landed on the exact same idea. Looking at the standard white stormtrooper, every single one of these creative teams independently designed a black armored variant with a menacing name. Nobody picked up a phone. Nobody searched a database. Nobody spent 30 seconds on due diligence. Shadow Troopers appeared in the 2004 video game Jedi Knight, Jedi Academy. Black armor, cloaking technology, elite. Shadow Stormtroopers, technically a different designation, appeared in other EU material with slightly different capabilities, but the identical pitch. Stormtrooper, but darker, but scarier, but elite. Black Hole Stormtroopers, named after Agent Black Hole from the 1980s Star Wars newspaper comic strips, wore black stormtrooper armor. Their distinction from the previous two amounted to reporting structure. Same armor concept, different boss. Storm Commandos completed the recursion. The franchise helpfully classified them as Shadow Scout Troopers, a variant of a variant, a shadow of a shadow, an elite trooper designated to be even more elite than the elite trooper it was already derived from. Lay the concept art for all four on a table. You're looking at the same character drawn 4 times by 4 different artists who were never in the same room and never once consulted each other's work. 4 independent creative teams, spanning 3 decades, arriving at, what if Stormtrooper but black? The licensing office didn't flag it. The continuity database didn't catch it. And each one shipped with copy that said, Elite, and Feared Across the Galaxy, as though being the 4th writer to paint a Stormtrooper black constituted innovation. The Dark Trooper name itself suffered the same fate. The 1995 Dark Forces originals were genuinely innovative, autonomous machines. But the designation proved too commercially potent to leave alone, and subsequent media kept resurrecting and redefining it, sometimes as a droid, sometimes as an armored soldier, sometimes as a powered exosuit, the definition shifting to fit whatever story or game needed a prestige-heavy unit that quarter. By the time the name had been recycled through 4 or 5 incarnations across 2 continuities, Dark Trooper had become functionally meaningless. A brand name detached from any consistent product, slapped onto whatever new premium unit needed a sales bump. This wasn't individual carelessness. The failure was structural, baked into how the franchise managed its own continuity. Lucasfilm Licensing maintained the Holocron Continuity Database, overseen by Leland Chee, which attempted to organize canonical hierarchies across thousands of stories produced by hundreds of creators working in parallel. On paper, the Holocron organized all Star Wars content into canonical tiers. In practice, the system was a filing cabinet, not a gatekeeper. Chee could catalog what existed, but the sheer volume of EU output, novels, comics, video games, tabletop sourcebooks, magazine articles, all publishing simultaneously through different licensees, made rigorous deduplication a practical impossibility. A comic book writer in 2003, creating a heavy assault stormtrooper for a Dark Horse miniseries, had no reliable mechanism for discovering that a novelist in 1997 had already described a functionally identical unit under a different name, or that a video game studio in 2001 had created yet another one for a PC real-time strategy title nobody outside of Germany purchased. The Holocron recorded what happened after publication. It couldn't prevent redundancy before it shipped. Writers just didn't check if the thing they were making already existed, and the infrastructure wouldn't have caught it if they had. Accidental redundancy dressed up as intentional variety, decade after decade. Disney's 2012 acquisition was supposed to fix this permanently. The Great Legends Purge wiped the EU's continuity slate clean, relegating decades of novels, comics, and games to non-canonical status. In theory, the new canon could be built with discipline, 0 redundancies, every variant earning its slot through narrative necessity. A fresh start with the authority to say no. In practice, the Disney era accelerated the problem. The Mandalorian introduced new trooper types. Obi-Wan Kenobi introduced new trooper types. Ahsoka gave us night troopers, who serve Grand Admiral Thrawn, featuring heavily damaged armor repaired with gold and gray accents and red cloth, some of them literally reanimated by Night Sister magic. The Book of Boba Fett recycled previous designs without adding meaningful distinction. Every single Disney Plus show, upon revealing its new variant, was greeted by the same audience reaction. A weary screenshot comparison to 5 existing variants that looked nearly identical, and a prediction, usually correct, that the new design would appear as a Hasbro Black Series figure within 6 months. Andor, to its credit, mostly restrained itself. The rest of the Disney Plus slate didn't. A clean continuity slate, and they filled it with the same clutter inside a decade. The pipeline has achieved a kind of industrial perfection. Concept art to screen appearance to convention reveal to pre-order page, humming along without ever pausing to ask whether this particular trooper is distinguishable from the last four off the same assembly line. Nowhere was the machinery more naked than in the mobile games, and nowhere did the consequences land harder on actual people. Star Wars Commander, a mobile real-time strategy game, generated unique trooper variants that existed only inside its servers. Units designed to populate monetization tiers rather than serve a story. Players invested time. They invested money. They built rosters around these units, strategized with them, discussed them in community forums. Then the game shut down. Those variants vanished overnight, deleted from existence the moment the revenue spreadsheet no longer justified server costs. The resentment burned hotter because of where the resources went. Disney wanted to focus all their resources on profiting off Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes, a gacha-style collector game built on an entirely different monetization model. Commander died so Galaxy of Heroes could eat. Its exclusive trooper variants functioned strictly as inventory, written off when the warehouse closed. Players didn't lose fictional soldiers. They lost purchases, real money exchanged for digital assets that someone at a corporate level decided were no longer worth hosting. The distinction matters to the people who opened their wallets. Galaxy of Heroes, still operational, continues generating trooper variants optimized for monetization rather than narrative coherence. New characters drop into the game through randomized loot mechanics and FOMO-driven limited-time events, described with the same elite and specialized language that has been doing heavy lifting since the pauldron days. A new trooper variant in Galaxy of Heroes exists because the monetization calendar has a slot open, and a reskinned unit with tweaked stats is the cheapest content to produce. The same mold plus new paint logic that drove Kenner's action figure line in 1978, refined to its purest digital form 45 years later, stripped of even the pretense that a story required it. The weapons tell the exact same story the organizational chart does, and the evidence is literally bolted together from surplus. The E11 blaster rifle, standard issue for every stormtrooper in the original trilogy, is a British Sterling submachine gun that entered service in 1953. The prop department at Elstree Studios sourced deactivated weapons from Bapty & Co., the legendary British prop house that supplied firearms to virtually every major UK film production of the 20th century. They bought a batch of Sterlings, attached a Hengstler counter as a makeshift scope housing, added cylindrical magazine furniture, and called it a blaster. Resourceful filmmaking under budget constraints, and nobody at the time pretended it was anything grander. The heavier weapons followed the same blueprint with bigger source material. The DLT-19 heavy blaster rifle, the long-barreled weapon lugged around by stormtroopers assigned to suppressive fire roles, is a German MG-34 machine gun from World War II, its distinctive perforated barrel shroud barely disguised under science fiction greeblies. The T-21 light repeating blaster is a Lewis gun from World War I, its top-mounted pan magazine visible to anyone who knows firearms. An ongoing and genuinely heated debate among prop enthusiasts concerns whether certain heavy blaster variants used the MG-34 or the MG-42 as their base. The two guns are visually similar, since the MG-42 was designed as a simpler, cheaper, faster-firing replacement for the MG-34 during the mid-war German armament scramble, and prop modifications sometimes obscure the telltale differences in receiver housing and barrel jacket pattern. Entire forum threads spanning hundreds of posts dissect screen captures frame by frame, magnifying feed mechanisms, trying to settle a question the original prop builders at Elstree never imagined anyone would ask 4 decades later. In newer productions, eagle-eyed viewers have spotted what appear to be FN SCAR rifles serving as blaster bases, a departure from the World War II surplus aesthetic, but the same fundamental method. Take a real gun, bolt on greeblies, rename it with a Blast Tech designation, pretend it was manufactured on Coruscant. The blasters are real guns wearing costumes. The trooper variants are standard stormtroopers wearing costumes. Same creative method, from a 1977 prop table to a $32 billion franchise, never fundamentally altered, only scaled up. On the forest moon of Endor, the Galactic Empire stationed scout troopers on speeder bikes and standard stormtroopers at the shield generator bunker protecting the second Death Star. An entire legion of the Emperor's best troops, according to Palpatine's own briefing in the throne room of the second Death Star. Against them stood Ewoks, armed with rocks, logs, rope traps, catapults, and hang gliders, weapons that a Bronze Age civilization would have found quaint. The Ewoks won. An entire legion, defeated by creatures standing roughly 1 meter tall, using tripwires and blunt force trauma against stormtroopers in full armor carrying energy weapons. Fans have argued for decades about whether the Ewok victory is believable or a narrative convenience baked into Return of the Jedi's kid-friendly third act. The expanded universe tried retroactive justification, guerrilla warfare advantages, home terrain familiarity, the hubris of Imperial officers who underestimated a primitive enemy. The Viet Cong didn't need air superiority to make the jungle unbearable for a technologically superior force. Fair point. But the Endor defeat becomes genuinely absurd when stacked against our prosecution's evidence. The Empire maintained 147 specialized trooper variants. Its R&D division had generated specialists for every biome in the galaxy: shore troopers for the beaches of Scarif, snowtroopers for the glaciers of Hoth, magma troopers for volcanic terrain. Yet the ones defending the most strategically critical ground installation in the Empire were generic stormtroopers and a handful of scout troopers on bikes. Where were the forest combat specialists? The heavy weapons squads designed for close terrain suppression? The dedicated counterinsurgency units that someone on the bloated org chart had surely proposed, named, described as elite, and submitted for action figure consideration? Those designations existed somewhere in the filing system. None of them deployed where they were actually needed. Because the variant machine was never about military effectiveness. An actual military would have sent its best-equipped units to the shield generator. The Empire, as constructed by a franchise that prioritizes merchandise pipelines over coherent doctrine, deployed whatever units were already in the script, which happened to be the ones whose action figures were already on shelves. The logic is self-defeating. When every unit gets designated special, the designation stops meaning anything. When everyone is special forces, nobody is. The Galactic Empire proliferated trooper designations endlessly, as though a new name could substitute for actual combat effectiveness. But that proliferation was driven by licensing agreements, rather than military doctrine. The results were incoherent. Some fans defend all of this with a shrug. The rebels only won because that's how the story was written. Obviously true. Nobody disputes it. But within the logic the franchise asks us to accept, the Empire's own organizational chart serves as its indictment. A military that fields 147 trooper variants and loses its most critical ground engagement to an indigenous species armed with rocks isn't suffering from a shortage of specialists. That military confused proliferation with preparation, new product SKUs with actual combat readiness. 147 named designations, each one elite, each one feared across the galaxy, each one destined for a blister pack on a retail end cap, and not a single one trained to handle a 1 meter tall bear with a sharp stick and home field advantage. Maybe the Empire lost because they spent their budget inventing 100 trooper variants instead of teaching any of them to aim. Subscribe for more stories like this.